What's going on, guys? Tonight, we are going to break down some of the recent news, like the huge hire of defensive assistant Al Holcomb, as well as all of Aaron and I's top priorities. But first, our guys with Handsome Jack.
Broadcasting live to Bills Mafia worldwide with Greg Tompsett and Aaron Quinn.
Welcome to the NFL.
Doesn't matter what's happened before today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
Your number one podcast for objective Buffalo Bills coverage. No matter where you are, we got you covered.
Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo
And nobody's
podcast.
talking about me there.
You are joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, we've hired Al Holcomb. Everything is good. Are you as excited as I am?
I am. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I feel because I just found out about the guy, really. I mean,
I just learned that human exists.
I think we were talking about it offline, Greg. Like, I'm pretty sure I've heard the name before, and I've been following Steve Wilkes, obviously, because of that Sean McDermott connection there. So we sure have heard about it. But man, the takes on a guy that we didn't even really know anything about before an hour ago is fantastic on the Twitter, the Bird app there. So yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts and opinions on this hire because, again, I don't know a ton.
And on top of this, so first, the Bills they hired Al Holcomb. I'm the same as Aaron. I had to refresh myself. I had heard of him before. He was the linebackers coach of the Panthers. He was on the Browns staff. He then was Steve Wilkes' defensive coordinator, which is where I had heard his name when that was floating around, because he was the interim defensive coordinator when Wilkes took over as the head coach for the Panthers. And he was brought in as a senior defensive assistant. I just can't imagine getting worked up about somebody being brought onto the staff. It's like they brought in Mike Shula, like, hey, here's another experienced guy to be in the room to help with the discussions. Eric brought up in our staff chat that he has some experience as a run defense coordinator, like to manage that part of it, which makes sense as a linebackers coach. So maybe that's to take a little bit off somebody's plate if that was Eric Washington or Leslie Frazier, or maybe that's something that he can contribute to, but it's just not a huge deal. I can't imagine getting worked up about it. Just like, we brought in Joe Dana, the new safeties coach, to replace Jim Salgado as the replacement from the Texans. And I just can't imagine getting worked up about that either. Like, okay, was there like a safety coach hire that people were going to be, yes, I can't believe we got that guy as our safety coach. As I said that, I did do that when we hired Ed Reed. So if we hired Ed Reed, maybe I would have gotten that excited, but short of it being Ed Reed, I just, people getting worked up like, oh my God, I can't believe they're bringing in another guy from their history and connections in their past. Like, yeah, that's how coaching hires work.
That's how all hires work, right? Like that's how
my hires. Like when I hire people, I switch companies. Guess what? I brought people over from my old company.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess the take should be the unknown. Like, you could be maybe sort of ambivalent to, like, just don't really care either way. But I think being mad about it is an underlying thing, that you're just mad about the Bills and you're looking for a scapegoat and you're looking for something to point and yell at, and you're mad that they didn't fire Leslie Frazier, and that the whole idea that this is status quo and like those types of things. Yeah, maybe it is, but status quo right now for the Buffalo Bills is not as bad as people want you to believe that it is, guys. Like, yes, they're not in the Super Bowl this week. Yes, they got bounced into the divisional round with a really poor performance, really all around
ugly game.
The offense probably needs more of the blame and the beating that Leslie Frazier and this defense are taking. A lot of that, more of this should be going to the offense. But man, this idea that it's really bad and they need to really like start firing everybody and doing all this stuff. I think, Greg, you and I talked about it. I think we're both fine if this was the year that Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott parted ways and they were able to bring in a new guy. But my point then even was it wasn't going to be some outsider. It was going to be somebody either internally or a move like this where they bring in someone they've worked with.
Holcomb, heck, it might have been Steve Wilkes.
Correct. Yeah. Which that's the other thing about this, Greg, is a week ago I tweeted it out. folks were clamoring for Steve Wilkes to come here. I think it was more about getting rid of Frazier than it was necessarily about
They
Steve
just wanted
Wilkes.
any name that wasn't Leslie Frazier.
Correct. But now we bring in a guy that's been with Wilkes. Wilkes has taken in places with him, and you're bringing this guy in. But
You
now
called him, his right-hand guy. I think that's accurate.
I think so. I mean, he didn't bring him to San Francisco, so I don't know what happened there. Maybe they both equally said, hey, let's go different directions at this point. But either way, they trusted each other, but we're frustrated. We were going to be happy for one guy and now frustrated with another guy that's right there with them and shares philosophies. I think it's just another voice in the room. There's nothing wrong. You brought it up. It's good to have succession plans, whether people like a succession plan that continues on this Carolina coaching tree or not. That's up for you to decide. But there's nothing wrong with stacking your staff with people that can come in and fill in jobs when your team gets poached.
Yeah, and I talked about it in the pre-show as we were getting ready that, I absolutely could see a scenario where we bring in Davis Webb as a, highly paid assistant quarterback coach, because we're preparing for the fact that, hey, Joe Brady already had a bunch of OC interviews. He's probably not going to be back as our quarterback coach next year. Maybe it's because of something with Ken Dorsey and he gets promoted to OC and then we need it. But that's just smart leadership. That's how you create succession plans. That's how you get ready. We'll talk about it in the priorities later. This is not some endorsement that, hey, everything we're doing defensively is great and that we should celebrate and want everything to stay exactly the same. We shouldn't. We should want tweaks and adjustments. I have a few on my list. But it's not the vitriol over this hire. And some of the people that were going as headlong as what they were, I challenged them to tell me that they had heard of this guy 2 hours ago and that they were aware he existed. It was frustrating to see them attacking him and that he didn't have a backbone and was just a yes man brought in. Like, come on, he's a grown man who's been a defensive coordinator and has other roles, and he's coming in as an assistant role. Settle down. It's just crazy.
Yeah, no, it's wild. And maybe I should save this a little bit more for when you bring up into your priorities here. But the conversation about this defense, I think it is important we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, right? There's flaws right now. We can talk about those. There's adjustments, to your point, that need to be made, but let's have a reasonable adult conversation about it. It doesn't have to be, this is never good enough. You're never going to win in a big game because of this defense. You're never going to be able to win playoff games. It's totally shot. The league has passed them by. Let's have a reasonable conversation of how do you fix some of the things? Cause there's not a big margin from where they are at to where they need to be.
Yeah. I'd like to have more reasonable discussions. If we're going to have a wide receiver 2, it needs to be somebody who sets the standard as the best wide receiver 2 in the NFL and gets 50 yards every game. And if we don't have anything better than that, it doesn't even count. Some of the, this is not us, saying that we weren't upset. We were. I was furious. The end of this season hurt me more than a lot of recent ones have. That the way that it ended and how it didn't, and I was embarrassed at how it made me feel. But watching other people flail around emotionally and having these ridiculous overreactions to everything that has happened has made me feel better. It's made me feel like a more reasonable person. I'm actually not that bad because these people are monsters. And going through there has been crazy.
Yeah.
Kel here with a great contribution. We appreciate you. Let's remember it took years for Andy Reid or Peyton Manning to make a Super Bowl. Once you hit the division round, all bets are off. I think we need to put some more tools in the playbook for high-end teams.
That's a great perspective.
You might hear a little bit of that coming up later on.
Sure.
As we'll kind of talk about this.
That's exactly where I'm at, Cal. I spent a lot of time that week after the divisional loss because there was a lot of calls for Frazier and there's a lot of calls for McDermott, get rid of all these guys. And I started looking up, again, everyone's clamoring for Sean Payton, right? They're trading draft picks to get Sean Payton to coach the Broncos. And great, Sean Payton's a good coach and he's an offensive coach, so it's a little bit different. I do think there's some correlation of offensive success and coaches in the NFL, but he had one Super Bowl of success. And yes, we want that for Sean McDermott,
Sure.
but he came to a really good, some of his best teams that he coached didn't meet their ultimate goal.
He had one Super Bowl a decade ago with a Hall of Fame quarterback. And a decade later, he's the most sought after thing in the world.
And I think later in Drew Brees' career, those teams were better than the Super Bowl team that actually ended up winning the Super Bowl, and they were probably more highly favored some of those years, and they had the same type of exits that Sean McDermott had. Andy Reid has had terrible exits. John Harbaugh, a guy that we speak really highly of.
The
Mike
Minnesota
Tomlin.
Miracle, the guy on our team that
Correct.
ended a great Saints team season.
That was a Super Bowl run for the Saints right there. I mean, the playoffs are hard. The margins are slim. I'm frustrated that they keep getting exited as well, but I'm not prepared. I'm not in a position to say we need to give up on it yet because it's hard. And a lot of coaches don't ever get a Super Bowl, and some of them only get one. And if Sean McDermott gets that one Super Bowl, the whole conversation changes, and he's got his job for another 15 years, whether or not he gets back or he has these types of playoff losses. Nobody's going to care again. And it's just weird to me. I get Super Bowl's the goal.
I want to interject real quick here and give credit to our guy Uber Hansen. Had a great stat that genuinely blew my mind. Like it was so much that I had to go look it up. You talk about one Super Bowl, you're just kind of like writing your future with the franchise. How many times, and if you know this, it's okay. How many times in the last decade have the Ravens made the playoffs? Of the last 10 seasons?
That's a tough division, so this feels like maybe a trick question.
And it is.
It's 6. I don't
so
know.
I would have. My immediate answer would have been 6 or 7. I might have even said 8. It's 4. They've missed the playoffs 6 of the last 10 years.
But how we perceive them, right?
4 out of 10. But he won a Super Bowl, and they're in contention every year, and no one is even remotely clamoring for his job. It's been a decade. No one's out there calling for his job. It's just amazing how
Mike Tomlin. Look at Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin's the same way with the way we talk about him. And I get it. Super Bowl is the ultimate goal, and rings matter, and all those things are important. Those particular coaches happen to early on in their career, not luck into, but the positions that they started their coaching careers in were a lot different than where Sean McDermott started with this organization. And while he's had opportunities to have a team that could go to the Super Bowl, they haven't quite done it yet. I do think I do have a line in the sand, Greg. It's probably if a similar exit happens again next year, then I'm starting that clock. And if it's a wheels fall off next year and Josh Allen's healthy and this team somehow totally misses the playoffs and he's lost that team, then I'm ready to jump on Twitter and have this conversation that people are having a year or two early. But we're very far away from it. And I think that perspective matters. Let's talk about the flaws. Let's find out how they can get better. I don't know if they will. We can talk about these flaws, but let's have reasonable conversations about the flaws. Let's not just start chucking everything and trying to restart. That's how teams stay in the drought. That's how the Bills stayed in the drought, was overreacting to every time it didn't go how you wanted.
Yeah. So, obviously some of these minor hires, I mentioned the possibility of a similar one offensively with the Davis Webb. Obviously we're past the point of dramatic changes. Ken Dorsey's going to be back. Leslie Frazier's going to be back. I even think we're past the point of letting Eric Washington go or any other tweaks that we had brought up. We're just past that point. It would have happened by now. Yeah. So maybe we make a small tweak adding someone. I don't think there's going to be additional firings. I don't think there's going to be additional changes. I'm not even going to advocate that that's a good thing. I would have been okay with a couple of changes. Sure. I didn't need sweeping dramatic changes that, hey, we fire both coordinators and do a brand new scheme and language on offense and a totally new scheme that we built, our, talent and players around the scheme and defense. So we'll see where that goes. Yeah. But that does leave tonight's topic. And the reason that we chose this and tried to keep it relatively open is I wanted to have the two of us, and we haven't shared these with each other. So we don't know what the other is going to bring up. We gave some loose parameters on what our top priorities are for this offseason. It could be a player. It could be a position. It could be a scheme. It could be a coaching element. It could be anything. So we can take this pretty broadly.
I like broad brushes.
And I'm going to let you lead off. I did debate going full 8 Mile here and just stealing protect Josh Allen as my number one topic and running with it because you've been going with it the entire offseason. So I will. The only sneak preview I'll give you is I did not put offensive line or protect Josh Allen on my list. I'll let you lead off because it would be my number one priority.
I almost was like a total jerk off on this one and almost put protect Josh Allen as all 5. So every time you came back to me, I was just going to say it again.
I would have been okay with it.
But I'm not going to do that. It is. Number one for me is protect
to be
Josh
for
Allen.
everyone, for
I'm
everyone.
over it. I think there's other flaws on this team that do need to be addressed, but I want Josh Allen to run when he can and when he wants to, not because he has to. I think he's the most valuable asset in all of Western New York, and I'm not even joking about it. I'm sure there's real estate assets that are maybe more substantial, but I think he's the goose that laid the golden egg for Buffalo sports, and it's the biggest sports industry in the world, and he's one of the stars in the biggest sports industry in America. And you've got him running around, his arms are bleeding, he's taking shots that he doesn't need to be taking, and every quarterback's going to, but I'm frustrated that they continue to, we were on the show, what was it, Greg? After his rookie season, right? That terrible offensive line that they rolled out, that was one of the worst offensive lines in the history. And we got on here and we're like, man, they're not going to be able to fix this in an offseason. And they brought it from the worst to mid, which was a huge leap in that one offseason to go from one of the worst in the league to an average offensive line. The amount of investment they did, we were both blown away how they were able to turn that over. But since then, they've kind of just been spinning their wheels of continuing to get sort of undervalued journeyman, below average offensive linemen to plug in, especially in the interior offensive line here. And they haven't drafted well, and guys haven't hit early. And so now you've come to a spot where you have, this is something we talk about all the time, multiple below average offensive linemen protecting your most valuable asset in your entire team. The Bills got very lucky that Josh is a super strong farm boy who chucks cantaloupes, because that injury probably should have sidelined him for a month. If we're being honest, he played through it. He got second opinions because the original opinions from the doctors were to rest. He went out and got other opinions so that he could play. That injury happened because your offensive line got worked by the Jets in that game. It was lucky that he survived that. You can't have that anymore. They need to really invest in it. We saw the Chiefs do it a few years ago. The Chiefs ran into a similar thing a couple of years ago where their offensive line Patrick Mahomes was taking a beating, and they went out and they invested in that offensive line. That's the type of offseason that I'm looking for, is in free agency, in the draft, depth, starters. I don't care if you rehaul pretty much all of it. The only thing that I need to stay is Mitch Morse and Deion Dawkins. Everything else can get retooled and go. I don't even care. That's where I'm at. Number one, protect Josh Allen at all costs.
Yeah. It's the right choice. It would have been my number one choice if I didn't know it was going to be your number one choice.
Yeah.
I've even gone as far, like, I don't know what to call Ryan Bates. He's lost the right for me to call him Rick Bates. I hope he earns that.
He's no longer Rick, yeah.
I've said it as the Bills have 3 holes on the offensive line that we already need to fix. So anytime someone brings up, hey, we need to cut Mitch Morris, or somebody earlier was talking about cutting Deion Dawkins, which broke my brain for a second. Why in the world would we create a 4th or a 5th hole when we already need to fix?
We got a lot of work to
So don't get me wrong. Neither of them are exceptional. I think Mitch Morris and Deion Dawkins are better than most fans seem to think, but they're not amazing. It's not Jason Kelsey. It's not Tyron Smith. It's not some like franchise, awesome left hand. He's not Trent Williams, but
they look a lot better if you had not Roger Saffold in between them.
If we put a good
Spencer Brown.
Even honestly, if we fix right guard and right tackle, I'm open to the fact that Ryan Bates looked better when he was between Mitch Morris and Deion Dawkins playing left guard.
And you know me, we can have one weak link.
Yeah.
Right? We can. That's fine.
So
you can't
I
have
agree.
3.
100% great. The only right answer. You hit that out of the park. I am going to lead off with fixing the slot. I think that we've seen so many times this season how important the young Cole Beasley role was. I'm not ready to say that Cole Beasley is still the answer to that, because I think we saw, even in the playoffs, and I know he didn't have everything, all the chemistry and all the playbook thing there. I think we saw that he's probably not that guy, but we also saw, I don't know if Jamison Crowder was going to be that guy, even if he stayed healthy. Pretty clearly, Isaiah McKenzie is not that guy. I don't know if Khalil Shakir is ready to be, and even if
Hope is not a plan, right? Is that what you told me?
It is not. Khalil Shakir, even if he develops into what we think he can be, I'm not sure it's a starting slot receiver. I think he might be a wide receiver 3-4-ish, inside outside flexible guy, and maybe his upside is like an Emmanuel Sanders, where he could be still a really good receiver, but not anyone's like top guy, and not that Cole Beasley. What we need is a guy that on every single 3rd and 6, we know can get open. And that doesn't mean you convert every 3rd down. It doesn't. But we need that guy and that safety blanket for Josh and that ability to keep drives alive, and that he doesn't have to go big play hunting, because in his mind, he has confidence going into that play that my best option is that guy's going to get open, and I'm going to go with him, go to him with the ball to convert here. We need that answer. We joked about trading Ed Oliver for Hunter Renfrow. I'm open to.
Were you joking?
A little, not all the way. I'm open to different scenarios. I've seen multiple guys in the draft who look very intriguing. Receivers do produce as rookies. That's one of the spots I'm okay really leaning into. I've had a couple people talk about answering the outside receiver spot to make Stephon Diggs the full-time slot, and I'm not saying that's a horrible idea, but that takes away from some of Diggs' value and versatility and all the things he can do. I don't want him to never play in the slot, but we don't want that to be our only option, is that, Stephon Diggs has to be the slot guy and we fix the 2 outside. I want a guy who can be that safety blanket. I wouldn't mind it being in the draft and growing with Josh for the rookie contract and a whole second contract. And, that'd be great if a guy could grow with Josh for 10 years.
Can we trade for Boyd?
There's a couple, there's some Band-Aid stuff with if the Bengals, needed to move someone with Boyd, because
everyone talks about T. Higgins being the one to move, but to me, it seems like Boyd would be the one that gets moved there.
Keenan Allen, if he's a cap casualty, is a Band-Aid. I don't know if you could trust him to stay healthy. That's probably not terribly different. There's a couple other guys that have been thrown out there like that. I think it's probably in the draft, but there's other options. And I know you and Eric have gone through and thrown a lot of names at me from a contract projection standpoint. We're going to be doing some things later on this week with some contract projections. Don't get your hopes up. They're not huge names. We are going to be bargain shopping.
Those ones that I'm not going to get into them because they'll be on my free agent wish list, but those are more replacing Isaiah McKenzie and below, not the top end of that wide receiver.
And I'll say the free agent wide receiver market is so poor. Richard Greenwood brings up, in my opinion, the best name on the free agent wide receiver list, which also means Jacoby Myers is going to get like $15 million a year. Like, he's about to get a ton of money. Whether he deserves $15 million a year is a really good question. In a normal year where there's other top end, high end guys, and he was a sneaky value guy, I would love Jacoby Myers. Yeah. I talked about Jacoby Myers during the season. As some of the extensions and free agency has played out, he's going to be out of our price range. Steve brings up Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen's an interesting name. That is a trustworthy guy with great hands. That's a super interesting one.
Diggs might be on the table for that.
There's still rumors that the Raiders might move Hunter Renfrow. I am 100% in on that. That is a totally doable contract that we can work with. Some guys brought up DJ Chark. He's a very different player. That's a higher end out. That's a guy who pushes Gabe Davis, and the two of them are wide receiver 2-3 together. I think he might get paid a little bit. So we'll save some of that discussion for our free agent wish list show coming up, and some of the posts that we'll put out later.
Yeah, we got content to fill here, folks. Come on.
Yeah. Hey, give us time. But yeah, my number one is fix the slot. I hope it's in the draft. I'm open to it being a guy like Thielen or Renfrow or someone like that. Another one, Daryl, I think Lazard is the one guy who could push Jacoby Myers for the highest free agent wide receiver contract. I think both of them are looking at 3 years, $45 million plus, and that they're going to get that kind of money. We are not going to be shopping to that end of the market. I can promise you.
No.
All right. Your number two.
My number two, I've been on this one for a while. I think I was maybe leading the charge on this one, is getting Tremaine Edmunds back, re-signing him. I wanted it to be an extension. I want to get that done. I know you put out some projections on that and maybe some other names that could be associated with it. The Bills aren't able to get that done, but I do think it's a priority. The pay is going to be more than most of Bills fans want it to be, but I think you've said it. A bunch of people say it. The contracts in the NFL are not necessarily for what Tremaine Edmunds has done. It's the projection of where he's at, where he's ascending, and what you're planning for him to do during that contract. And whether or not you agree with that, I think that he will be worth it. One thing that is really frustrating to me in this conversation about him is that the spot track value on him. Spot track, I like that site. I'd have nothing against them, but they need to, if their values, their own internal algorithm to come up with projections are always so far off what players actually get, then it's not actually a market value. The market value is what a player will get paid. So I heard him on the radio saying, well, we have it at 11 million a year, but we expect him to be at 16. Well, then his value is at 16. What do you do? That is how value works. So it's setting expectations poorly, I think, for a fan base of how that contract is going to play out. But I think he's such an important part to this defense. We saw it with the lack of him in the roster this year. I think you have Daquan Jones. You now have the piece in front of him to play free. I just couldn't see you getting rid of him at this point with how special of a season he and Milano had.
Spot on. Great call. I did share. So my projection is 17.5 million, which is basically saying he's not at the tier of Roquan Smith, Shaq Leonard, Fred Warner. He's a tier down from that. I basically have him a little bit below what CJ Mosley got when he got the contract, because that's basically with inflation. Mosley would be a little bit above there.
And yours was pretty backloaded.
Yeah. And so I also built it where in the first 2 years of the deal, our cap hit is $7 million and $9 million. And his first big cap hit year is also the last year of Matt Milano's deal.
Yeah.
So
when he's like 26 years old,
and when Milano would be 30, and now it's getting to the point where, hey, now maybe you are moving on. And some of the people whose frustration is, oh my gosh, we can't have $30 million spent in the linebacker position. You're right. You can also build it so we don't, so that it's lower. So it would be like 11 million and 7 million. So 18 million this year, which is still a lot. That's not nothing, but it's not 30 million. And then the next year it's 20 million. And then when Milano's deal is ready to come off is when it jumps up for Edmunds. And if we do one more extension for Milano, we deal with that. And you can always, kick things down the road for later on with Edmunds, which is a benefit of how young he is. I also did it with a 6-year deal. So you have flexibility to do those kind of things. And I put in my subsequent reply to that, I'm not 100% that I would do it. Like, I'm torn. There's a piece of me when I was down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl with Anthony and Eric. We're sitting in the stands and it was between practices. And I told him, I said, my hardest part is in a vacuum, I'm terrified of what this defense will look like without Tremaine Edmunds. And I think we need him. I think he's the perfect example of draft, develop, and resign. He's a team captain. He's a young player that's developed and got better every year. He checks so many boxes. Also, if I was the GM, I would let him walk and I would spend the money on offense. And I would say that, hey, we still have Micah Hyde and Trey White and Matt Milano and Von Miller and Daquan Jones. I need you guys to figure it out. And yes, it might be a Band-Aid 1-year linebacker like a Anthony Walker or Deion Jones. It might be a rookie. It might be a Band-Aid so that we can take a rookie in 2024. But you want to know what? We have a lot of other good, really talented guys. I need you guys to figure that out. I'm going to go spend some money on offense. That's what I would do if I was GM. So I'm torn because he checks so many boxes of the kind of player we should keep and that I think we're going to keep. But there's also a piece of me that wonders, does Bean see those same needs and priorities that I do? And are we going to pivot? And I think there's a non-zero chance that we pivot to the point where it might be Edmunds and Poyer and Singletary all walking, and that we go the value. You're a top-notch thrift shopper. We might do some thrift shopping and just go in the draft and roll it back with some, dent and scratch deals.
That might be what bringing in Holcomb is, a history of linebacker coaching. Maybe there's some, hey,
coaching up a rookie.
Yeah, maybe it's Bernard. Maybe we need to develop the guy we already have here and get him involved and have more positionless linebacker play in this defense. I don't know. There's a scenario. The non-zero scenario for me is your projection gets exceeded by another team that falls in love with
somebody. Could absolutely give him the Roquan Smith deal and say, we'll give you 5 years, 100 million,
yes,
20 million a year. Come on over.
Yes, there's a lot of defensive-minded people in both front offices and in charge of teams around this league that drool over a player like that. We've heard coaches just go gawking over him and what he does.
Do you know what team most analysts would tell you had the worst linebacker play in the entire NFL last year? The New York Giants.
Oh, Giants.
who have a GM and a head
Right.
coach who are pretty familiar
And a
with
lot of
Tremaine
money.
Edmunds and have a boatload of cap
Sure.
space. The New York Giants could absolutely afford to give Tremaine Edmunds 5 years and $100 million.
Yeah, and that's my worry. Maybe more so than the Bills moving on, because we'll talk about it here. I think that the weapons are there on the expensive stuff. I think is already in house for the Bills on offense, and I just think they need to get better at some of the stuff that is going to cost them a lot of money. They need a lot of pieces, but I think I'm more secure in the weapons, I think, than a lot of people are. So I would still try to keep Edmunds. That's still one of my top ones.
So my next one is development more formally of a secondary pass rusher. I'm open to the fact that might be Gregory Rousseau. Eric has shared some pretty good underlying metrics that show he was actually pretty consistent before and after Von Miller. He didn't drop off after Von Miller. He was pretty much the same guy. So that triggers for me, is that guy what we want in that role? Like, he is absolutely a piece of a good defensive end rotation in the NFL. He can play 60 snaps percent of snaps for me for 5 more years. Is he the guy that we want opposite Von Miller on 3rd and 12? Or is that the spot that we need to find someone who actually comes in for Rousseau on those downs?
And then kick Rousseau in.
And and maybe Rousseau kicks in, and that you and I have joked a lot that, hey, it would have been awful nice to still have Jerry Hughes this year to be ideally opposite Von Miller, but a replacement there. But when Von went out, our pass rush that was actually pretty damn good for early on in the season lost a lot of teeth, and all the things we talked about in the offseason of the benefit of Von being a domino effect player on and off the field. His development off the field was great. We saw the benefits of that, but the attention he drew, the ability to close, those huge sacks and those big moments, sacking freaking Patrick Mahomes in the moment when it mattered. We didn't have that guy. We didn't have that guy anymore. And I think we're going to get Von back. He's going to be here. I think he's actually going to be back to pretty darn close to what we saw before, and still going to be there for the second half of the season in the playoffs. And that's going to be great. We need someone opposite him in those big downs. And I think it might need to be in addition to Gregory Rousseau. Not
where you at on
with him,
Epinesa? Because I think his pass rush is better than people feel about him right now. That he kind of had a sneaky, 6.5 sacks.
He probably could use some snacks.
I think he might need a little. Yeah, I think maybe the thing that hurt him the most in his development is the taking the weight off,
the body transformation. Yeah. So I think we have 4 defensive end 4s, or 3. Maybe 4. I'll even say 4. So Shaq Lawson, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa, and Jonathan Kingsley, I think are all capable of being DN4, and that they should all be on a roster. They're all good enough to play. None of them are. I want to run 3 guys at 60% each. So you think about like 2 defensive end spots is 200% of the snaps. If you do 3 guys at 60% each, that's 180. And they're the ones playing the majority of the time. I want a guy who is there, not at Von Miller's caliber, but at a starting caliber, where when you see these other teams that, they're bringing in Justin Houston off the bench, they're bringing in this other Jason Pierre-Paul, they're bringing in this other guy off the bench he's a little bit older, but in this role, when he knows, hey, I'm only coming in to rush the passer, it's still really powerful. Brandon Graham just had 12.5 sacks at 35 years old. You can still do that. I don't mind.
So you're saying we're bringing Jerry back for one last run, or is that what you're telling me?
I've heard crazy good things. My number 2 was secondary pass rusher. And I think it's a spot where we need to figure out the answer to that, because I think that Gregory Rousseau might be a really good version of maybe what Shaq Lawson was, like a really good starting defensive end, strong side, run defense, but maybe he needs to either kick inside or come off the field on 3rd and 8.
Well, this is a conversation that we will continue on here in a minute. It is not in line in my priorities, but I have a different sort of take on exactly what you're talking about, honestly. Yep. So we'll go back into it here in a little bit. My number 3 sort of goes into a conversation you had. I don't necessarily need it out of the slot. I want this team to have some influx this offseason of speed, separation, and youth in the wide receiver room. I think that I'm not out on Gabe Davis yet, but you need to start the preparation for being out on Gabe Davis. You need to start the preparation for being out on Stephon Diggs, if we're being honest. Like at some point here, you're going to have a true develop internally, I think, a true number one wide receiver. You're not going to be able to continue to you're not going to be able to go out and make another big trade. That will hinder you to do what
receiver in the first round.
Maybe if it falls the way. I mean, right now the mocks I'm taking, it's like O-line.
Correct.
But
I'll be fine with that. But I do think that is one of the things.
It's on the table.
If you're drafting for wide receiver 2 now, that can eventually be the wide receiver 1. That's that path.
Yeah, we need to get some speed. One thing that is a little bit glaring to me, I know we can't talk any negativity about Josh Allen, our savior, anywhere in the world on the internet, but there's still a little bit of concern to me that Josh needs guys open. He's not the offense, whether it's Ken Dorsey or him, he is not throwing guys open with anticipation over this last year. So he needs to have guys that are getting separation, getting open, and yak is still a problem. I don't believe players necessarily are yak guys, but it definitely speed is correlated with guys that have high yards after catch. So I would like to see a little bit more of an influx of that in the wide receiver room. And I think to match up with your point, it would be perfect if it was also the slot. If you got some real good speed out of the slot with a guy that was shifty and could get open, I think that's the bee's knees right now. But outside of that, they need to start preparing for the future so that they're not in the spot that they were. I mean, I know everyone was clamoring that Isaiah Hodgins went to the Giants and had success. That wasn't the answer for the future receiver, but without him, you got into the spot where you had to go Paul John Brown off the street. You had to go get Cole Beasley because you didn't have reserves. You didn't have anybody in your well that you're developing that's young and can be that next group of guys. They need to start focusing on that, in my opinion.
I like him. And I mean, I think that's logical where we had a run where the most impactful receivers were second and third contract guys like John Brown, Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, who all had really good stretches with the Buffalo Bills, but it hasn't been through a youth investment. Heck, the only one that's really contributed is a 4th-round pick in Gabe Davis and a 5th-round pick in Khalil Shakir. So we're ready for that. And to get impactful speed, you have to draft it early because those guys go quickly. So I love that one. My third one, I wrote down, for the love of God, execute a screenplay. So I've been wanting it for years. I think James Cook's a really good fit for it. I think that Nyheim Hines has a real good chance to be, I think he's going to get the Mitch Morse, hey, we're going to call it a restructure, but really it's a pay cut, and you're going to have a not likely to be earned incentive that you can earn the money back, but we're going to lop about $2.5 million off of that salary, and you can get it back if you play well. He's going to be able to read the writing on the wall that the free agent running back market is ridiculous, and he's not going to cash in if he goes out to be a free agent. So he has incentive to stick with the team. But both Nyheim Hines, specifically Hines, and James Cook are capable of being exceptional screen running backs. They're great in that. Cook did it at Georgia. Hines was awesome at it with the Colts. We have to figure out a way to do that. I don't know if it's Josh Allen. I don't know if it's Ken Dorsey. I don't know if it's Aaron Cromer and the kind of linemen we had. I told myself last year that it was going to work because all of a sudden we had athletic linemen who could get out in space. We do have athletic linemen who can get out in space. I've seen Spencer Brown get out in space. I've seen Mitch Morse get out in space. I've seen Deion Dawkins get out in space. It's one of the things Roger Saffold could do. I don't know why that didn't equate to being able to run a damn screen. It's just crazy that all these other teams, how many times did you see another team time it just right on one of the few times that Leslie Frazier was bringing a blitz and they dumped it over our heads for a stupid screen because that was their hot read when they saw the blitz coming? And we didn't execute more than I could count on my hand. How many times we pulled it off. They got to figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, the timing's off when they try it. It never seems to operate right. One thing that I thought, and this is more like a football philosophy conversation, I think, was in why the screen game hasn't worked for Buffalo is that maybe how teams, not all teams, but how some teams rush Josh Allen, and that the threat of his legs force people to stay within their lanes. You don't see a lot of guys pinning their ears back to rush him, which the screen game really does play off of another team's aggressiveness. But then we have seen teams like Miami, like the Bengals, who came heavy on the blitz, and you have to have that counterpunch in your pocket. Whether or not you use it all the time, you have to have that counter when teams are bringing the pressure, and you have to relieve some of that pressure. So I'm with you on that. I would just ask if we could also maybe mix in some Dawson Knox tight end screens in there a little bit too. Get him the ball a little bit.
Doesn't have
Everyone
to be
can
only
get a
running
screen.
backs. Doesn't have to only be running backs. I'd look. Hey, maybe that super fast slot receiver that you were talking about. He can have one too.
Yeah,
that's great. All right, what's your number 4?
Number 4. So we're gonna go back to that conversation about edge. But in the context of Von Miller's return, and what are we gonna do about the hole that is left by Von Miller? With maybe he is back halfway through the season, maybe he's not back until the full year, like we saw with Trey White. I don't think it will be that case, but we don't know, and we don't know how he's going to return. Right? We saw Trey White took really towards the end of the season.
And I will say there is a fair amount of good information that positions that consistently go forward, it's easier to come back than positions who have to go backwards and move that way. So defensive ends traditionally are able to come back quicker and easier. But Trey White's also younger than
he's younger, and we saw Harrison Phillips struggle to get back to form, although different interior defensive pushing forward is probably a little bit different than what Vaughn does. But we saw Vaughn after his first injury, while he did come back and he was still probably better than majority of pass rushers in the NFL. He wasn't Von Miller really until we saw him here back. Really, that Super Bowl run, that playoff run, he started to really come on for the Rams. But that with Buffalo, you saw, okay, he's actually back to the guy he was in Denver. So it could take a full, into the playoffs before we see Vaughn being Vaughn. And I think that could be something that really is maybe not being talked about enough on this defense, of how do we fill that void in the meantime, because it is going to be something that rears its head that you don't have that guy. I do believe in Greg Rousseau. I think he can be the one that you were talking about with Von Miller. Awesome. I think I like that sort of difference in edge rushers, where you have a guy that's maybe a little bit, he can get pressure, but he's good at contain the cleanup sacks that he was knocked for. Those are all good things that play with Von Miller, who's aggressive and is going to get quarterbacks to move off their spot. And I think with a Greg Rousseau, if he's going to be your number 2, you have to have a Ferrari type dude and a Von Miller lined up on the other side of him that can get the quick pressure, that can get around the end, be a little bit bendy, which is not something that Greg Rousseau can do. I don't see anyone right now on the Bills roster. Maybe it's Epinesa. I don't know if that's consistently enough. So I don't necessarily know that I need a big splash here, but I feel like they need something to at least keep it until Vaughn gets back. And I don't know what Jerry Hughes's contract was and how that you could get out, but guys like that maybe it's an aging vet that still has some bend and still can get some good pressure on a guy just until Vaughn gets back. And then you have both. Then you have that, what you talked about. Now you have that rotation where it's 3 guys that are your primary pass rusher. So sort of played into where you're at, but more in the immediate, this next season, how do you get by without Vaughn?
I think that's spot on. A great call. My 4th one is a similar element on defense, and it's wanting to see more nickel versatility, in that all of our discussions are, well, you can't take Taron Johnson off the field, and hey, we'd like to see this, but you can't take Taron Johnson off the field. Okay. So if we all agree that Taron Johnson is one of our 11 best defenders, which of course he is, he genuinely is, then we need to change how we use him. And we need to be able to have him be that extra defender in the box sometimes, be that great nickel defender sometimes, but also sometimes be able to drop as a safety, also be able to play the deep half sometimes, also be able to use him to disguise coverages, and that we can't allow teams to dictate him being brought into the middle, like a middle linebacker, like Miami was doing, where they were using motion to trap him against Robert Hunt and against big guards and things like that. And then we saw other teams, we saw the Bengals mimic that and do the same thing with using jet motion to trap him inside and become that run fit defender to have to play the inside gaps. You have to be able to pivot from that. And that pivot isn't taking Taron Johnson off the field. It shouldn't be. But if we're going to do something with that, then you need to be able to use him differently and not let teams dictate how we use Taron Johnson. we need to flip that around and use it somewhere else. So I don't want to see us get to the point where teams can use Taron Johnson against us because he's too good of a player to let that happen.
Right.
But I think we're dangerously close to that with some of the things that are now out there as available approaches.
Yeah, you got to find when teams are scheming up to sort of, I don't want to say pick on it, because the Bills still had more success than not, even, though teams went at that. You do have to find a way to offset that and get teams at it doing that. So I'm with that. I think that's a fair assessment. I actually have my fifth one is sort of in line on the defense again here. And it's the safety position for the Buffalo Bills that isn't Micah Hyde. We don't know the status of Damar Hamlin. We heard today that one of the NFL doctors said that they're guaranteeing that he will play again. Is that next season? Is he going to be ready for the offseason activities? I have no idea. We have not heard a word. I'm not going to speculate on it. It's an unknown right now for Brandon Beane in this defense. Christian Benford was talked about at the end of the season of maybe he will become a safety, but that's, again, hope's not a plan. We're hoping that maybe that's something
that should be a bonus.
Yeah, that would be a bonus. So there's some guys in free agency that I like. They're not high-end players, but either were Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer when they got here. So maybe you have to hope that you can fill that, but Jordan Poyer, to me at this point, seems like it's the writing's on the walls. It's not going to work out where he's back unless he hits the mark and it really is just dried up and people are scared off by age and injury. And maybe that the Bills luck out where his best bet is to make a run back here and get a decent deal, but I can't see them I don't think it's realistic that he's coming back. And that scares me. As good as Micah Hyde is, and I'm excited to get Hyde back, not knowing what they're going to roll out at safety next year, along with some, maybe if we don't get Tremaine back and Vaughn's not coming back, like you are now opening up a lot of holes in this defense for me of a lot of unknowns that I'm not sure where you're going to be at. So safety is something I'm watching very closely. Something I'm definitely keeping an eye on both in free agency and in the draft. There's a couple guys in the draft I like, but it's definitely something that it's the unknown of the position that's giving me cause for anxiety and why it's a priority and I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah, I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense and something that we need to consider as well. And it leads kind of into where my final one here is. And I know there's a lot of people that are frustrated with the comments that are there. And I think Roy, rightfully, I get where he's coming from. Oh, you want Frazier to change how we use Taron. Good luck with that. It leads into my final comment, and it's adding more variance on defense and a counterpunch. And I think people are kidding themselves, or like everything else, they're watching our team with a more critical eye than they watch everybody else.
Right.
Guess what? Nickel cornerback is a starting position for every team in the NFL. There are no teams, 0 out of 32, that play a third linebacker more than they play their nickel corner. None. The difference is we do it 90% of the time, and some other teams do it 75% of the time. It's not a huge swing. This is not, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're the team that plays nickel defense. Everyone plays nickel defense.
Yeah.
It's the defense in the NFL.
Everyone's
it's
passing.
what every team does.
Believes.
It's a passing league. You have to have 5 defensive backs on the field, period. Right. Full stop. That's how defense works. Now, I think that we stay with it more than we should. And the part that frustrates me is I've seen them pivot from it. We did it in the Chiefs game. Against the Chiefs, we ran a dime. We brought Saran Neal in instead. We took a defensive tackle off the field and brought in Saran Neal as a bigger, thicker defender. That kind of look where all of a sudden now you're doing a 3-2-6 where it's 3 defensive linemen, which is feasible when your defensive tackle is Daquan Jones, 2 linebackers, 3 corners, and 3 safeties as a mixed in look. Now all of a sudden gives you some different versatility. You need a bigger bodied safety who probably 20 years ago would have been a linebacker anyway. Saran Neal would have been a linebacker 20 years ago. You need that kind of versatility in that position. But those are the kind of things you need to add in, and we've seen it. So I think when people get frustrated, they're like, oh my God, he just plays nickel every single time. No, he doesn't. I've seen him not do it. I've seen him use other things. Yeah. I don't know why we don't do it more often.
Or people saying they're unwilling to add anything. We saw wrinkles added in. We, again, maybe not as early as we should have and as often as you should have, but they are adding things to this defense. I think that's a
They
good
made
one.
pretty dramatic changes with Von Miller, things that we never allowed a defensive end to do before. The way that he played, the snaps that he played, the fact that
Right.
he rushed from a two point stance, multiple different things that we haven't seen before. His alignments, how wide he lines up, nobody else does that.
Yeah.
We've made tweaks and changes to how we do it, but people then assume that no, we just run nickel every single play, no matter what. And unfortunately, we did that too much in some games that I think we should have pivoted a little bit. But people have now taken that to be that we will never change. So that was similar to McDermott early in his career. He was the guy that was super conservative, would never go for it, would never lean into analytics, and then he did. It was just simple. Brandon Beane was the guy who would never trade away draft picks until he did. He was the guy that people told me he's never going to take a cornerback in round 1 until he did. We have all these things that we use small sample sizes to convince ourselves, no, this is never going to change. This is always going to be like this forever and ever until it changes. And they do it over and over again, but we somehow kid ourselves into thinking that, nope, now is the time that we're going to stay exactly the way we just saw it and nothing's going to change it. It's always going to be just like that. Well, they've changed everything else. Every year we've made other tweaks and changes, and no, they're not broad sweeping changes to turn into the Rex Ryan 4-6 crazy blitz defense. Well, guess what? That doesn't exist in the NFL anymore. Nobody does that. Wink Martindale is a crazy blitz happy crazy person. He still runs a base nickel most of the time. It's how football works.
Right. I've got an honorable mention that is sort of in line with where you're at here. If you don't mind if me sneaking an extra one in here. It's coaching growth in general. And I don't think it's not as bad as everyone wants it to seem. I think, Ken Dorsey got better as the season went on. He really did. This was our fear, Greg. I think we were talking about it where everyone thought
Would
this
the
was
learning
be
curve be too
super
painful?
smooth. Yeah, super smooth transition just because he was already in the building. But being a first-year play caller is a new thing. Like there in-game adjustments, dealing with defensive coordinators and what they're throwing at you. There was bound to be a learning curve there, and I do think he got better as the year went on. We saw guys getting better usage, but the utilization of players. I think the conversation around Dawson Knox and Gabe Davis this offseason is a direct correlation to how Ken Dorsey was running this offense. I think those players both had more meat on the bone than we are seeing when we go look up their stats and stuff like that. And to me, it's a usage issue, not so much. I'm totally fine. People have been putting out these ideas that the Bills' weapons are somehow inferior to all the top teams that were remaining in the playoffs after. I don't believe that for a second. Yeah, I don't think that you can convince me that they're that far behind these other teams. I think that usage was a problem in the scheme. So I hope that he grows, does some self-scouting, starts to use Dawson Knox as he was paid to be used, and starts to use Gabe Davis as a person that can be a true number 2 wide receiver in the league. And then Sean McDermott. I don't talk bad about Sean McDermott that much, and people really crap on me for being a Sean McDermott homer, but an area I would like to see him improve, and I think Leslie Frazier takes a lot of the heat on this one, is trusting in your players. In the big moments, in the big games. I think that is where the problem has lied, is they believe in the scheme. And I know the scheme's good and the scheme has worked. I think they're overcoaching in the bigger moments. And they're trying to make it so that Joe Burrow has to put passes in the perfect spot because we're going to call the exact perfect defense. And everybody's going to have to be in their exact spot based on what everyone else is doing. And it's not allowing players, your star players, you talked about it, the amount of money that you've put on this defense and the amount of veterans you have on this defense. In these big moments, you got to let them go out and play, and you got to let them play fast, and you got to trust your guys to make plays for you. And I just think they clam up in some of those spots. And then we saw the trust issue rear its head with Kaiir Elam. You pick a guy in the first round, and all season long, in the back of his head, every time he's going out there, if he makes a single mistake, he's getting pulled. You didn't give him the confidence a guy like that needs to go out and.
You have a track record of playing your first round picks.
Yeah.
Ed Oliver played, Tremaine Edmunds played, Tremaine White or Tre'Davious White played. All of our other first round picks played.
But you didn't allow this guy to get the confidence. And I know that there's a lot of probably old school mentality of Sean McDermott of like, oh, you got to come in, you got to earn the trust and stuff like that. But sometimes you have to give it, right? Like sometimes you have to allow somebody a leash to go make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, to build that confidence. I need to see more of that from Sean McDermott. So on the big scale of in the big games, let your players play fast, but then also with these younger guys, trust in them and give them that confidence. Those are areas I'd like to see some growth in the coaching staff.
I think that's a great one. And I talked about it previously of I'm still very much a believer in Sean McDermott as a leader, Sean McDermott as the person and element of the galvanizing element of the culture of this organization. I think he's actually still an above average in-game coach. However, we saw some pieces where it made me fearful of, is he going to know when to be aggressive, when to take calculated risks in those moments where you need to? And obviously those 2 punts in the final playoff game when everything in front of us was telling us, hey, this is your only chance here. Like you have to go here. You cannot give them the ball back here. And yes, could it have looked even worse if we went for it and missed? Sure. But all you were doing was making us lose less bad. You weren't trying to win. That wasn't trying to win. So some of those pieces are in the back of my mind that we need to see. We've seen improvement. We've seen him lean into more analytics. We've seen him make more calculated decisions. We've seen him be better about using timeouts. I know people get stuck on the stupid ones where we saw them because of the crowd. We saw them run a play afterwards and they decided that was all of a sudden a bad timeout. In general, he's been one of the top 5 in timeout usage in every metric that measures it. The one that hurts me is, can we find more calculated risks? And Pete sharing it here, I mean it as a risk. He's sharing here the win percentage didn't mind. Honestly, both of the punts were coin flips.
They were coin flips, yeah.
They were coin flips. The point is, if anyone watching that game could tell me that gave us a better chance to actually win, I don't believe you. Like, I don't care what the metric shares. It was, we had a chance to risk staying in the game and going for it to score, or yes, we could punt it away and you were just making the loss look better. That was not actually improving our odds to win. Everything in that game was showing us that you had to take that calculated risk to keep the ball and to score. And I think learning when to take calculated risks, that you can't simply be a slave to those analytics and do what is analytically inclined every single play. You also need to understand your team and know when you need to take a calculated risk.
For sure. I don't disagree with you. I will say in that particular game, I don't think I felt better about the offense or the defense giving you an opportunity to win that game, right? Like punting, I did, since he was going to go score, and I didn't trust Josh Allen to do anything with the ball. Like, they were so beat on both. That's a hard call. I don't know what I would have done.
Even knowing that that's true, because I don't disagree. I don't think they all of a sudden had some awesome chance. You want to know what? Do you want to know the difference of the message it sends to your sideline and your locker room of, hey, we're going to go down swinging behind our guy, or, hey, I don't think you guys have it today. I'm going to punt the ball away in an elimination game when it was our only chance to win. Which message do you want to send your team?
I mean, you could also, our defense, we trust in our defense to finally get a stop. I don't know. Like,
sure.
It's a tough one. I don't know. It's easy again in hindsight, for sure. I don't know what I would have done in the moment. I really don't. Especially, I don't think he leaned into the analytics on it. I agree. I think maybe on one of them, you definitely take the swing, and then the other one you punt. But tough in hindsight. But I agree that he needs to show more aggression. We've seen it in other years where that first round when the Kansas City game of the AFC Championship, taking the field goals, right? Like, don't do that. Like, go for the win, go early and go for the strike.
And that's part of what we'll see here. So, or what we need to see here. So, tonight was about being able to go through identifying our high level areas that we need to focus on and that we want to be able to bring forward. In some of the coming shows, we're going to talk about, out of our pending free agents, who do we want to re-sign? Who do we want to bring back? You already touched on Tremaine Edmunds. After that, we're going to do our salary cap extravaganza, which is one of our favorite shows every year, to be able to bring on other guys from the Cover One Network, and we'll go through our big what we think Brandon Beane should do to create cap space and to be able to lay out all the different options. Then we will get into both our free agent wish list on offense and defense. So those are the shows that are going to lead us up to free agency in the NFL. We'll then obviously have some shows reacting to free agency, and then we will fully pivot over and get into full draft mode. But I know we take it very seriously every year that I think some shows dive right into draft mode right now. But the first event that comes in the NFL offseason is free agency. So we want to talk about who we're going to bring back on our team, how we can create cap space, and who our targets are going out there looking for people in the offseason.
Yeah, and this one's a big one. I think I used to be a guy that the second the season ended, I would jump right into the draft. But that was, for me, that was more like the drought eras where like, well, we're really going to have to hit on these top 3 picks in order to get anywhere. Now, seeing Brandon Beane, a real GM finally in Buffalo, he really, the model for the Bills is to fill as many holes as you can before you hit the draft. And so I now with the, what is it, 20 something free agents, you said, pending 24 pending free agents, there's a lot of work to be done, right? Like, and it's coming up more and more against the cap. So this one's going to be maybe the most interesting period of free agency in terms of that thrift shopping that you're talking about and trying to find those deals and bringing your own guys back so you can fill some holes so you have more flexibility in the draft.
Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. We'll see where we end up with some of those moves, but a lot of content coming for you guys, a lot of things to be excited about, and a lot of fun to be able to take us through the rest of this offseason as we now pivot away from that 2022 season and what we need to do to get over the hump here in 2023. So a lot of fun. A big thank you to our producer, Chris Kepner, to obviously Aaron Quinn, everything else going on here at the Cover One Network. But on behalf of Aaron, I'm Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are